Well, today I'm really excited because I have a really phenomenal guest, and his name is Steve Alligood. And Steve, I met just last Saturday at the Thomas Lee House. Thomas Lee is a landmark in East Lyme, specifically in Niantic, right off the interstate, basically. And I was able to meet Steve, and Steve was the most phenomenal storyteller. And I thought, this is a story worth telling. I have to capture this story. So, Steve, welcome to my show today.
Thank you
for, so glad that you could be here. And Steve, tell me a little bit about yourself before we dive into the Thomas Lee House, because you had a life prior to working with the Thomas Lee House. Is that correct?
That is. I grew up in Niantic, and fortunate enough to grow up in the great town back in the 60s and the 50s.
So you've been here pretty much your whole life.
After high school, I moved away for a while, and I came back in my late 30s, and that's when I got involved with the Historical Society.
Nice. But you also had a career where you are retired from now.
Yes, I'm retired from Millstone. I worked at Millstone and retired almost 4 years ago.
Well, congratulations
Thank you.
on that. But you're a good example of what to do, I think. Some people don't know how to handle retirement, but you've handled it beautifully, if anyone would want to know my opinion.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, stay active, stay involved, and keep moving. That's the secret, I think.
That's the secret, because you look vibrant and healthy, and your eyes sparkle, they're bright. So, yeah. And so tell me, Steve, you got involved with the Thomas Lee House.
Right. I joined the Thomas Lee House is run and maintained by the East Lyme Historical Society, and they've been around since 1897. And I joined them about almost 30 years ago, and I knew about the Lee House, and it's been there since the late 1600s, and I decided I want to be part of the organization that maintains it, and during my lifetime, and I've got involved with it, and it's a great bunch of people to work with.
Yeah, everybody was so friendly. I was so excited that I actually joined and became a member myself when I was down there on Saturday with my husband. So yeah, it is. I'm excited. And there's going to be a membership meeting on Friday, so we're excited to pack a picnic and find out more and find out how we can get involved. So tell me a little bit about the grounds. It seems like it's more than an acre. How big is the property itself?
It's a few acres, and it consists of where the Lee House is, and it has the Little Boston Schoolhouse, which I believe was built in 1803, and that was moved there in the 1930s. It used to be up by the front of the prison, up the street, the gates. And they moved it there, and we maintain that. There's also a barn that has a lot of artifacts in it, Indian artifacts, local artifacts, and history exhibits. And there's a cottage on the corner with Giant's Neck Road, which was built probably in the 1880s, and we own that as well.
Nice, very nice. And beautiful gardens, too.
Yes.
I know that there's an herb garden in the back, and what else is on the property? I saw that there was a great big huge old well kind of thing.
Yes, there's an old foundation of a barn in the back there. Maybe you're referring to that. There's a well sweep in the front, which is an old-fashioned well, and we maintain the property and offer tours of the building, and it's open to the public. And it's
Okay, so when is it open? Because you can't be open every day.
No, it's open July and August on Wednesday through Sunday, 1 to 4 in the afternoons. And we also open by appointment. There's a phone number on our Facebook webpage. I don't have it on me right off the bat, but it's also open for appointment if you want to make a special.
So all we need to do is just go to the Thomas Lee House. It's like I said, a historical landmark. You can either just look it up and it'll pop up, and then you can get directions, and then you can also schedule a private tour, if I'm not mistaken, right? And what were some interesting things that we should know about Thomas Lee and the actual residents?
The Lee family lived in it for quite a few generations. Thomas Lee came over from England as a little boy in 1645 with his parents, and was going to the Saybrook colony, which back then was an independent colony. Actually, it joined Connecticut in 1644, but he came to Saybrook, and on the way over, his father died of smallpox.
Oh dear.
And
how old was he then?
He was about 6 years old.
Oh Jesus.
And they had land that they were going to settle in what is now Old Lyme.
Okay.
And he eventually moved back to that area and built a house where the Dooley house is now.
Okay, so he didn't build an Old Lyme, he built...
Well, actually, he was taken in by a gentleman named Matthew Griswold, who was his mentor. And his mother got remarried, moved away, and that was very common in those days. You had to work as a social cohesive structure with two people. And he settled in, he got some land grants in Lyme in the 1660s, and he settled there. And records show he was married to his first wife, Sarah, around 1670, and he lived in what was called the Black Hall section of town.
Okay, okay.
Where the Black Hall River is.
Okay.
And he lived there for a number of years. And I've been doing a little research on him during the pandemic and pulling up old records. And he and his wife had 3 children. They lived in that section of town. And in 1676, his wife died in May, and he remarried within 6 weeks.
That's pretty fast.
Yeah, and he and his second wife, they had 11 children. And I think it was at that time he may have moved toward the Lee house and settled that property.
Oh, okay, so 14 kids, you need a place to...
Yeah, well, out of the 11 children they had, 4 of them died of childbirth. But I mean, life was pretty hard back then. But anyway, so that's...
But he still had 10 children, living children in total, 3 from his first wife, and then 11, but then 4, so 7, then 7 plus 3 is 10, right? So,
yeah.
So a house that would accommodate 12 people...
would be pretty crowded. But I think his children were born starting in 1672. And when he married his second wife, the youngest child was 2 years old.
Oh.
And he got married in 1676, and then the other children were born in the 1680s, all the way up to the 1690s. So by the oldest, the first 3 children, I think, had moved out.
Okay,
at that time.
So it wasn't all that crowded, maybe, but still,
he owned a lot of property. Saybrook was the colony settled over in Lyme, what is called Lyme now, and Old Lyme. Back then, it was called East Saybrook, and then they changed the name to Lyme. And Lyme, the town of Lyme consisted of about 110 square miles back in 1660 when it was set up, and it included parts of Niantic all the way out to Wigwam Rock, and going north to Salem, Lower Salem, and then west to the Connecticut River. So it was a big area. And when they set up the settlement of Lyme, it was about 30 families back in 1660.
Oh, so everyone had a lot of space.
Yeah, a lot of space. And
so what was the business of Thomas Lee, other than somebody who gathered property?
He was a farmer.
Okay.
And I recently rediscovered some records of his land transactions that I hadn't seen mentioned before in the local history that we know of. And I came across, the first thing I came across was in 1679, he bought some land in the Bride Brook area.
Oh, beautiful.
Where the house is now. And it was called Bride Plain. And he actually bought it off a man called Thomas Hungerford.
Okay, and the Hungerford's a name that you hear around, and you'll see Hungerford street signs. And
when they settled Lyme, it was called what was it called? The Lovely Departing or something. But the families moved there, and Thomas Hungerford had a section of land. They would sell sections of land for 50 pounds. And apparently Thomas Lee bought the property off of Thomas Hungerford in 1679. So that may have been the time when he moved where the Lee house is now.
Okay.
And it's possible the house could have been there before he was there. It could have been Thomas Hungerford. We don't know for sure.
Oh, okay. It's one of those unknowns because he said 1660.
Circa 1660 is what the sign says. But I think a lot of times they went with 1660 because that was the year that Thomas Lee turned 21.
Oh, so he was old enough, legal enough.
Yeah.
So was it Griswold who actually raised Thomas Lee from the time he was 6?
They say he was a mentor, and so it's a little,
Don't know.
no, but they seem to think he was under his care, yes.
No, I'm wondering about the farming component of it, because this is not necessarily easy area to farm. You know, we have some harsh winters at times, and
Yes.
and a lot of rocks if you dig, and
Well, he was a great businessman too, because some people say his holdings were 1/8 of all of Lyme by the time he died. But what's interesting I found was when he bought that property in 1679, he also bought 100 acres over on the 4 Mile River on both sides. And
well, that was smart.
yeah, and I just moved to that area a few years ago, and I can tell you the soil is very rocky. And Thomas Lee, 3 years later, sold that property. I think he bought it for 25 pounds. He sold it, I believe, for 100. No, he traded it with a guy named John Robbins for about 100 acres in what is now Rocky Neck State Park.
Oh, beautiful.
And I think he realized Bride Brook was much better farmland. It was less rocky, and it was better. He had property down there as well. So.
Well, you had a lot of work to do, though. If it's
Yeah.
sandy soil, that you need to farm it differently than you would back in England, because that soil can be so rich as well. So
Right.
that would be an interesting thing for him to trying to get. So what are some other things that you've learned by looking at the Thomas Lee House? You've already given us some really interesting information, but if I was interested in knowing more about the history of this area, why would going to the Thomas Lee House be beneficial for me?
The Thomas Lee House is probably the best wood structure in Connecticut in its original form from the 1600s. It hasn't really been remodeled. It initially was built in the late 1600s. When you walk in the building, it's on the left side, and they had, as the family grew, they added on to it. And it's got a lot of artifacts and furniture from that time period, not necessarily Thomas Lee's, but from that time period. And a lot of people who are interested in architecture find it quite interesting to look at the structure of the house.
Well, and when I was there, I was able to see the picture of Taft, our
Right,
president.
Howard Taft.
Right, Howard Taft, and he was actually one of our, I don't remember what number president he was, but he was one of the presidents who was able to be there on site. And
Yeah, he had just, that was 1915, and Teddy Roosevelt, I believe, was president then, but he was the former president, and I believe he was affiliated with Yale, and he came up for the opening of the Lee House. It's an interesting story. The East Lyme Historical Society, a bunch of ladies, primarily Celeste Bush was the main person behind that, but they found out that the Lee House was going to be razed. A farmer had bought it and turned it into a chicken coop, and he was going to destroy it. And they knew how old this house was, so they had literally no money at all. And these ladies, just with nickels and dimes and stuff, they saved up money and they opened the Lee House. And they had Howard Taft. He came up by vehicle from New Haven. And they had over 1,000 people there.
That's enormous. That
Yeah.
is really, that's an historic moment, I would say.
It was. And
I saw a picture of those women.
There's a great picture of him in the doorway. He was a very large man, and it's quite a picture of him.
He didn't walk up the stairs, did he?
Well, I hope he did. I don't know. But he was a big guy.
He was very big, right.
And he was there, and the Historical Society's been taking care of the Lee House ever since. And,
Nice.
And we're always looking for volunteers. It's a great group of people, and they do a lot of good things. And the Lee House, you know, I'm a docent there on every Thursday in the summer, and it's a great place to go, and it's very peaceful. When you sit in the place,
It's very serene. Yes, I agree with that. So if somebody was interested in volunteer, some opportunities would be you could work in the yard or the garden. You could help.
You could join the East Lyme Historical Society, and you know, if you wanted to, you could be a tour guide and help out with other projects like you mentioned. And we actually are going to have an annual meeting this Friday. And it's at 6 o'clock. I believe that's the 18th. And
Come with a picnic.
pack a
picnic.
lunch, pack a little picnic for yourself, and we'll have a meeting at 6 o'clock. And if you want to join, that would be a great opportunity. Or you could just visit us at the Lee House on Wednesday through Sundays, 1 through 4. We have tours. We're all on donations. It's free entry, and it's an interesting place. It's a good place to bring kids.
Absolutely.
The schoolhouse is really neat. Children love it because it's like stepping back in time when you walk in there.
Well, it's so close, too, because
Yes.
I took my kids up to Sturbridge and to Plymouth Plantation up in Massachusetts, and I think that this really kind of is a nice mark on this part of the state and this area. You don't have to go all the way to Massachusetts to see the little schoolhouse. I was impressed by the manuscript, the handwriting that was on the
Yes.
chalkboard. And
The Dying Charge, yes. That was John Lee wrote that. He was the son of Thomas Lee, who initially moved into the house. His son built, I think he was born in 1674, and there's an interesting, they call it the Dying Charge, and it was what he wrote on his deathbed to his children, telling them how to live their life. And it's very interesting to read it.
Well, he wanted them to live a good life, be
And
generous.
Be generous and good to your mother, and avoid evil, and don't indulge in excesses and drink or food. I mean, actually, a lot of common sense things he wrote about, and it's kind of neat how he ended it. I say this to the end of time for my children to keep a copy of this and pass it on to their children. And here's a guy on his deathbed, and he's thinking about his children and how they should live their life. And
Well, that's nice. I'm
it
sure
is.
those
It's really
are
beautiful, really.
Yeah, I thought so. I was really impressed by that, and it covered the whole wall, and that was really nicely done. How that was curated. I thought it was interesting too to see how to make candles, how they would pour the molds, the wax into the candles, and
Right.
make their own candles, and the hearth, the open hearth, and you could actually see where the women or whoever was tending the hearth would step their feet back and forth because there is just a little bit of a difference in the pattern of the wood kind of thing, and there's just so much a fabric to it that you can just
Right.
really see how important it is. But back to the schoolhouse, I thought the schoolhouse was neat because of the little slates that all the kids had at each individual slate at the desk so they could practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. It gives you a whole different perspective on the education process in the old days. And they called it the Boston School because it was based on Boston Latin, supposedly up in Boston, and it was the curriculum, and that area of town became known as the Little Boston area. And the last class, that school was actually used all the way up to 1922. That's when it closed. And I can remember as a little boy growing up in Niantic, there was a gentleman in our town named Pep Vittori, and he was in the last class of that school. And they used to have a picture in the school of the last class when they all got together in the 1960s and had a reunion, I guess.
Interesting.
And,
Yeah, really
I'll have
interesting.
to break that out again. That's kind of interesting.
It
to
is
see.
really interesting. And East Lyme Schools goes and tours it every year, is my understanding.
One of the things the society does is they have a 5th grade program, and every year different elementary schools go there on one day, and they have a history day, and the kids get to see different things. In the past, they've had reenactors and
Nice.
People from the different Indian tribes around here have participated, and it's quite a good program for the kids.
That's great. Yeah. And 5th grade, so we have 3 elementary schools in town. Is it just all our 3 elementary schools?
It's just East Lyme school systems. That I think during the 2020 we didn't participate because of obviously the pandemic. But
Of course.
yeah, but it's a great program.
It is, and you just learn so much. I think it's just authentic, and you understand things. And these are the days where a lot of history was happening, so that's really important. So there's a special event that's coming up on August 21st. I
Yes.
made note of that.
Yes, we have a archaeological dig, and it's another great family participated thing it's great for children. And one of our members, Rod McCauley, he kind of spearheads that with the state archaeological department, and they have a dig for kids to kind of look for artifacts and it explain how to do it. And think they may put a few things in there for the kids to find. To kind of,
yeah.
but it's a lot of fun. People get involved, and that's on a Saturday on August 21st.
Well, I signed up for it because I thought this is interesting. This is a fun thing to do, and it's a fun way to learn. So I'm excited about that. And you said you bring in people from the state, people who...
Yeah, there's some folks from the state archaeology department that help us with that.
Nice, very nice. Okay, so, and you brought some books. You have some other things that you wanted to share? Because I think, you know, for the overall periphery view, the 20,000-foot view of the Historical Society, we pretty much have a picture of what's going on at the Thomas Lee House. But this is not our only location in East Lyme. There's 2 other spots.
Yes, they're not with the East Lyme Historical Society, but they're also museums in town. We sell a bunch of local books about, if there's any history buffs out there, there's some great books there about local history in East Lyme. This one here is very good about the Lees. It tells you all about the Lee family and the Thomas Lee House and the Little Boston Schoolhouse. And it interesting thing about the Thomas Lee, his descendants.
If you just hold it right in front of you, then there you go. So
the Thomas Lee's descendants, there's quite a few remarkable descendants that they talk about in here. One of his grandsons became a governor of the state of Connecticut back in 1782.
Do we know his name?
Yes, Matthew Griswold.
Oh, the Griswolds, of course.
The Griswolds again. They were tied into the Lees, and his Thomas Lee's daughter, I believe Hannah, was married John Griswold, and they had a child, Matthew Griswold, and he was quite a man, but he was governor, and Fort Griswold's actually named after him over here in Groton.
Oh, that's really interesting.
So,
and then are there people? There's probably Lees around.
There are several doctors. There was one doctor, and he was. There's an interesting story about him. They had a yellow fever epidemic in New London, and all the other doctors left town because it was so bad. And he stayed and cared for all the people, and
he survived. I
hope. Survived it, yes. And one of the descendants also was Lizer Lee, who was the soldier who operated the Turtle, which was a submarine that was built in the Revolutionary War to attack the British, and he was actually the guy that it was propelled by your hands, and he actually tried to attack the main ship of the British fleet, the HMS Eagle, and put what they called a torpedo. It was basically a charge on the bottom of it, and he's trying to blow it up, but it didn't stick to the bottom of the ship, and he was afraid of being discovered, so he backed away, and he let the torpedo loose when it blew up. So you can argue that he was successful because the British left the next morning. The fleet decided it was too dangerous to be in New York Harbor, so he was a Lee descendant. But this is an interesting book about different people, and like I say, it's on a rainy day or a cloudy day in the summer. You don't have anything to do. The Lee House is a nice place to go. Caroline Fraser Zinzer has written several books. This is one of them called Dear and Affectionate Wife, and it's a series of letters from a ship captain in the 1830s who lived over on the 4 Mile River, Charles Chadwick, and his wife, back and forth, and it's extremely well written. Tons of information about East Lyme is in the little facts you'd never know. If you're familiar with Rocky Neck,
of course,
they had a little shipyard right in the beginning of the 4 Mile River after the War of 1812, and they built ships.
Didn't know that.
And the Chadwicks actually had packet ships which carried mail, and they had, I think, 6 or 8 ships that sailed from New York to London 3 times a month. They were one of the first ones to have direct passage to England on a regular basis. This is in the 1830s or 40s, and they lived on 4 Mile River. There was 4 captains, and this is an interesting book. It gives you some insight what it was like to live around here back then. And Mary Chadwick, her husband, was out at sea for long periods of time, so they'd get these letters intermittently, and she would tell him what it was like on the farm and how difficult it was in the winter. And
Oh, that sounds like a really good read.
Yeah.
And then you have a couple more.
Another one that's really good is Vine Utley. He was the country doctor in not what is now East Lyme and Niantic, and this is he lived 1768 to 1836. Another book that Caroline wrote, and it's fascinating because he talks about all the patients he visited and what their ailments were, and gives you a lot of, and he also tells you a lot about what it was like in East Lyme back around 1800. He had a real interest in what made people live long. Longevity was a fascinating subject to him. And so whenever he looked at patients that were over the age of 80, he would really try to figure out if they had a common denominator.
And what did he find out?
He didn't find out. In fact, unfortunately, he died at 68. But it's interesting. He describes the people, and he actually had a few correspondences with Thomas Jefferson discussing that.
Nice.
Because he was like, you know, the premier scientist.
What is the secret? Exactly.
But I think he thought it was nutrition, and but you'll have to read the book.
I'll have to read it, absolutely. And there's one more that you have.
Yes, this is a very old copy, but anybody in East Lyme should have this book. It's the ABCs of East Lyme, and it was written by our first town historian, Olive Shendelly, and it goes through all areas of East Lyme in alphabetical order, and that talks about different things, and it's a great little book, even for a stocking stuffer or something, for a teenage kid who might want to be interested in history. But it's a great book.
And all four of these books are available at the Thomas Lee House. So
Yes,
if you go down there, you can...
Yes, and there's actually more books than these. There's all kinds of books there. But by the way, Olive Tubbs Shendelly, she was the great-granddaughter of the dear affectionate wife couple, the Chadwicks, and she found all their letters in an attic in an old steamer trunk.
Wow.
And that's where they got the information from.
Well, in the paper too, or the Times, right? There's the East Lyme Times. There's often Shendelly articles.
Yes.
And
she used to write a column for many years, and they actually show that they have that in the paper, and she was quite a lady.
Right, so those are interesting reads. So I'm looking forward to reading some of those things, and thank you so much for bringing those.
You're welcome.
We just have a couple of minutes left, and I know that you have had so many interesting things to share today. I appreciate that. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to get in the last couple of minutes?
No, I just think joining the East Lyme Society, Historical Society, is a great, good thing to do. I'll tell you really quickly, I remember at our annual meeting about 20 years ago, I went around and I asked the older members of the society, I said, any of you guys as kids, do you remember seeing the Hindenburg going by? 3 or 4 different people told me stories about how it flew over East Lyme back. And to me, that was an interesting thing to hear their accounts of it. And,
Right. You know? No, and it's a good way of finding out the story. And the other thing I thought was really interesting when I was touring is the barn, and how you had an old postal truck that used to be drawn by a horse, and how beautiful that was. And you can see that and see how it was done back in the day. And those are some real live
part
art.
of our history of East Lyme. You know?
Absolutely, right. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your time and coming and being with me today. Such a gift to all of us. And if anybody else would like to be on my show, it's Cate Steel, Stories Worth Telling. You could call me, or it's catesteele@gmail.com. I'd love to have you on my show. Love to interview more people. It's just such a way for us to get the word out there about these important things. We have to preserve our history, and I think it's a great way for kids to get excited and to learn authentically.
And we'll see you at the picnic Friday.
Well, I'll look forward to seeing you at the picnic on Friday. Thank you so much, Steve.
You're welcome.